morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. It is raining outside, but it is always sunny in our inner landscape. What's that television show? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I don't watch that show. I just know the title of it. But it is always sunny inside, and that's what counts. So let's begin with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrasts, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. Okay, so here are our quotes. The first one is by Jules Verne, and I believe he was the one who wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Okay, so this is a quote about the sea. He says, "The sea is only the embodiment of a supernatural and wonderful existence." Next, the deeper the blue becomes, which I'm assuming this author also is talking about the water, the more strongly it calls man toward the infinite, awakening in him a desire for the pure, and finally for the supernatural. The brighter it becomes, the more it loses its sound until it turns into silent stillness. Wassily Kandinsky. Next, the dreams which reveal the supernatural are promises and messages that God sends us directly. They are nothing but his angels, his ministering spirits, who usually appear to us when we are in a great predicament. That is Paracelsus, and that was back when people only needed one name. All right, next by John Berger, compassion has no place in the natural order of the world, which operates on the basis of necessity and of efficiency. Compassion opposes this order and is therefore best thought of as being in some way supernatural. So, let's take a walk on the wild side this morning and talk for a minute about the supernatural. The last two quotes I read contain what I consider two very different views of what we call the supernatural. When we say that word, it does indeed have a very broad meaning. Technically, it's defined as a manifestation or event attributed to some force beyond scientific understanding or the laws of nature. Another definition is of or relating to an order of existence beyond the visible, observable universe. And one more is departing from what is usual or normal, especially so as to appear to transcend the laws of nature. So, in that next to the last quote we read, which was by Paracelsus, he was a physician/astrologer who lived in the early 1500s, and he was part of what is known as the German Renaissance. Supernatural, according to him, refers to the things that we are able to do only in our dreams, like fly. You know, that's one example of things we can usually do in our dreams that we can't do when we are not dreaming. And he believes these abilities that are only available to us in our dreaming state are messages from God that come to us by way of his messengers or the angels when we find ourselves in trouble. And I assume his meaning there is that God encourages us through these dreams to believe there is a way out of the trouble or the predicament that we find ourselves in, even if it seems like we would have to escape by supernatural means. He wants us to know that we can, that the supernatural is available to us. So that would correlate to the part of the definition that we just read that says of or relating to an order of existence beyond the visible, observable universe. All right, so that was one quote. That was one view. The last quote would correlate more to the part of the definition that states departing from what is usual or normal. And that's the one, of course, that talks about the concept of compassion being supernatural in the sense that it's not normally found in nature. Because nature, which is ruled largely by animal instinct, has little, if any, room for compassion. Now, we like to believe that it is, but in reality, it's not, because nature is basically concerned with efficiency. Sometimes, however, it does shine through. Compassion does shine through in the animal kingdom. For instance, when you see these little videos or pictures or memes of when a dog starts taking care of an orphan duck or something similar, that sometimes happens. But more often, nature in many ways is heartless. The strong preying upon the weak, and even some mother or father animals killing their own offspring because it is expedient at the moment, or it is what is best for the herd. But regardless of which definition of the word supernatural we use, transcending nature and natural laws, something we can't readily explain, or just something other than normal, or other than the normal natural course of things, one thing is certain, is that humans are and have pretty much always been fascinated by and drawn to the supernatural. I'm going to read now from an article that appeared in the magazine Psychology Today. Okay, and it's called America's Love Affair with the Supernatural by Lawrence Samuel. In case you've been in a cave recently, the supernatural, or phenomena that cannot be explained by natural laws or understood in terms of scientific knowledge, has deeply affected the trajectory of everyday life in America, revealing key insights about who we are as a people. Despite our reputation as a people of uncommon common sense, that's debatable, Americans have in fact had a long love affair with the supernatural. The temptation to explore what lies beyond has been a powerful one, whether it's the ability to read people's minds or have contact with those on the other side. Why are we so interested in things that are not real, i.e., things we can see, hear, or touch? This world is apparently not enough for us, and this fact is something that warrants further investigation. Most curiously, perhaps, the supernatural in America has increased in both volume and importance over the years rather than diminished. Given the rise of science and technology over this same period of time, this is surprising and intriguing, as all expectations were for the logic and rationalism of the 20th century to crush the mystical and superstitious ways of the past. Instead, however, belief in the supernatural has run on a parallel course with science and technology, the two seeming to feed off each other. The more we go down the scientific and technological rabbit hole, the more we appear to need the supernatural because it is inherently timeless and cross-cultural. Therefore, I believe our desire to explain the unexplainable will only get more intense as the 21st century moves on. This belief in the unbelievable and giving it sacred value is essential in binding us together as a society because it helps us to see ourselves as connected to each other on a deeper level. Okay, so let's go back and look at some of those statements in a little more detail. First, the article makes the point that as our world, our society has gotten more and more technological, and as more and more scientific discoveries have been made, as we have begun to rely more and more on technology and on science-based evidence, the expectation was that the interest in and reliance upon the supernatural as an explanation for things would just eventually die out. The expectation was that people would lose interest in it because all the technology and science would have made it obsolete. When we have scientific explanations and or technological solutions for events and problems, then we won't need to believe in or even be interested in the idea of the supernatural anymore. That was the expectation, but that is not what happened. The article says, instead, the belief in the supernatural has run on a parallel course with science and technology, the two seeming to feed off each other. So, the belief in the supernatural and something beyond or other than this earthly realm we live in now has always been there, running on a parallel track. It's just that for the last couple of centuries, the last couple of 100 years since the Industrial Revolution, the spotlight has been more on the rational and the technological and the scientific. But the supernatural has still been there in the background, and now it seems to be coming to the forefront again. Why? Well, for one thing, we're realizing science can't explain nor fix everything. It can fix a lot, it can explain a lot, but not everything. So it's been a pendulum swing from, back in the Dark Ages and medieval times. Belief in the supernatural took the form of what we call superstition. And it was very prevalent because we had no scientific explanations for all of this phenomena that we didn't understand back then. Superstition is defined as the excessively credulous belief in and reverence for supernatural beings and or a widely held but unjustified belief in supernatural causation leading to certain consequences of an action or event, or a practice based on such a belief. So I like the way that this next particular paragraph describes what superstition is. It says, in the pre-scientific Middle Ages, the world was at the same time both fascinating and frightening. In the absence of proper knowledge, people had no choice but to fall back on their own imaginations to make sense of the myriad natural phenomena around them. The result was a world where everything seemed magical, a place teeming with angels and demons, fairies and goblins, elves, gnomes, and witches. Which that sounds pretty good to me. Anyway, so as often happens with things, when things began to change, okay, and technology and science began to advance, society, or what is known as mainstream society, threw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were, and the pendulum swung from no science and technology and a total belief in superstition to explain supernatural phenomena. The pendulum swung all the way from there to almost discounting anything supernatural altogether. And for a long time now, we've pretty much been over here, and we have based what we believe to be real only on our five senses, what we can touch, taste, hear, smell, and see. Also, for a long time, anyone who held any belief in the supernatural was made fun of or dismissed as crazy. But now we're shifting back a little to our belief that not everything out there can be explained through science and reason, because in a lot of ways we've come to the end of that, and we've realized that perhaps doing away entirely with our belief in the supernatural was a little hasty. A line from the article says, why are we so interested in things that are not real, i.e. things we can't see, hear, or touch? Well, we've now begun to ask the question, what's real? And who is to say? Who gets to say what's real and what's not real? The Bible talks a lot about the unseen realms and supernatural happenings. A specific story that comes to my mind is a story from 2 Kings when Elisha was fighting a battle and his servant was frightened. And Elisha prayed. He said, God, open the spiritual eyes of my servant. So here it is from 2 Kings 6:16. So he answered, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. All right, so he was able to see beyond what was natural. And so there were lots of other things like this in the Bible. Earlier in this book of the Bible is when the axe head floated up to the surface, which, if an axe head is very heavy, naturally it defies all natural law for the head of an axe to float on the surface of the water, but it did because Elisha needed to find it. Also, there was a time where Joshua prayed for the sun to stand still so that he could finish the battle he was fighting, and the Bible says it did, and so on and on and on. But there was a time in our pretty recent past, relatively speaking, like I said, the last 2 centuries or so since the Industrial Revolution, when we would either try to explain away the supernatural things that happened in these Bible stories or say, well, that was then. Stuff like that doesn't happen anymore because that was just back in the Bible days. So the first thing this article establishes is that we should be careful about what we refer to as real, because reality is not always defined only by what our 5 senses tell us. The second statement of note in this article is this sentence: this world is apparently not enough for us. And this fact is something that warrants further investigation. So wasn't there a James Bond movie called The World Is Not Enough? Okay, well, that's beside the point. But anyway, this is something, our interest in this warrants further investigation. So I am in agreement with that. As the industrial, technological, and scientific age now comes to a close, or at least a time of great shift as we continue to move out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, we are finding that the spotlight is moving away from the things we have previously considered real according to our 5 senses, and because we want and need, the reason for this is because we want and we need more than this world has offered us. And that's the point that this article is making. That's the reason why we're still so interested in what we call the supernatural. Because for all the ways our ever new technologies provide for us to connect with each other, in reality, we are now more isolated as individuals than at any other point in history. We've talked about this before on Tuesday mornings at length. Technology has made it possible for us to be ultra independent. So it has lessened the need for us to live in community. I read a statistic to you some time ago in another teaching about the percentage, and I forgot exactly what it was, but it's pretty high, of people, especially elderly people, who admitted they had had no actual human contact in several months. So we now live in a society where that's possible because of our advanced technology. We do so much of our shopping and even communicating online. Things are sent to us in the mail. We can even shop for our groceries online, and they're just brought to our door. The necessity for leaving your house is becoming less and less, especially we have seen this over the past 2 years. So the opportunity for basic human contact is becoming less and less. So we've become, actually, as a result of this, more disconnected. It's kind of a paradox. The last few lines of the article addresses that in this way. The author says, the more we go down the scientific and technological rabbit hole, the more we need the supernatural, because it is inherently timeless and cross-cultural. So, there it is. We are still interested in the supernatural because it is timeless and it is cross-cultural. What else does that sound like a definition of to you? Eternity. Deep down in our soul, our spirits long to return to a place that is timeless and where all cultures and people are one. That's our definition of heaven, eternity. That's being one with God, our Creator. That's where we came from before we entered our earthly bodies, and it's where we will always be drawn back to. It is a place beyond time and beyond all of our scientific explanations, and that's why the interest in anything connected to it, such as what we call supernatural events, has never and will never die. Because, as this article says, this present world isn't enough for us. We instinctively know there's something more. There is something beyond our present reality. He continues, therefore, I believe our desire to explain the unexplainable will only get more intense as the 21st century moves on. This belief in the unbelievable and giving it sacred value is essential in binding us together as a society because it helps us to see ourselves as connected to each other on a deeper level. Well, you know, quantum physics has already kind of proven that we are all connected by some invisible field that we've not been able to put our finger on yet. So that's what we're all longing for, seeing, feeling, and living our connection with each other across all cultural lines on a deeper level. We did away with the superstition, and for a while, we almost lost the supernatural along with it. But now we have realized that there is still value in those things that are beyond explanation here in our three-dimensional world, but on a higher and more sacred order than the last time we went around this particular cycle. So as we know, time is not linear, it's cyclical. King Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that has been will be again. So in the Middle Ages, there was a spotlight on the supernatural, as there is one now, beginning to be one now. But at that time, on that rung of the spiral, level of the spiral, was superstition. But now we've come around again, but we're not at the same place. We're one spiral higher. And so we're coming back to the starting point on a higher level with a better understanding now of what the supernatural really is without all the superstition attached to it, because we are evolving. So, how does this relate to religion and our spirituality? Traditional Christianity has taught us that Jesus, we're always hearing this phrase, should be the captain of our boat, okay? So, going up to the next level of the spiral, though, from that, we learned that Jesus was our high priest. He was our example, our way shower. He said over and over again, even, that he wanted us to do what he did and greater. So we talked about how Jesus being that concept of Jesus being the captain of our boat only keeps us children. But when we grow up into the Christ consciousness that is within us, we do what he did, and we become the captain of our own boat. I did a whole series several years ago about this, about becoming the captain, and I did this whole metaphor about comparing boats, different kinds of boats, to different kinds of spiritual practices. And we talked about how sometimes we need different kinds of boats for different seasons in our lives, because we outgrow certain belief systems and spiritual practices as we mature. And that's how it should be. We don't have to stay in the same boat or spiritual practice our entire lives. In fact, we shouldn't. But when we move on, okay, a key to this is we don't turn around and destroy the boat we're in. Somebody else might need that boat who's coming along after us, and that's okay too, because we're all at a different place on our journey. So we don't destroy all the boats we've been in. We just step out, leave it for someone else, and move on. So I want to just quickly recap some of the information from that series that I did that relates to what we're going to talk about for the rest of the teaching today. So we talked about coming out of the mentality that we are sinking in the angry waves of sin, always in need of Jesus to pull us out, like that old song, Love Lifted Me. We've talked about getting up in the boat on our own, and because now we know we have the power to create our own reality. And then we learned that we could also move from boat to boat, from belief system to belief system as we grow. So we're going to talk today, we're going to talk about that final step of our spiritual evolution, which is getting rid of the boat entirely and entering the realm of the supernatural by actually walking on the water, just like Jesus did, who, again, is always our example. So for this, we're going to go to the book of Matthew, chapter 14, beginning with verse 22. This was right after Jesus had fed the multitude with the fish and 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. He had just performed that miracle, and this is where the story picks up. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, Come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Okay, so continuing on with this metaphor as boats on the sea of life, the disciples are in the boat, okay? They're all comfortably in their spiritual practice of following Jesus. And that's what's carrying them along on their sea of life. And they've just seen Jesus perform this wonderful supernatural miracle of stretching 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread to feed a multitude of thousands of people who had come to hear him teach. And maybe they were sitting out there discussing that. Maybe they were out there saying, that was so wonderful and miraculous, we want to be able to do that. And maybe secretly in their hearts or even openly with each other, they were wanting to connect more with this supernatural power that they saw in Jesus, because deep inside they knew that was the next step. They knew that was what they were supposed to be doing as well. So maybe they knew that that was what Jesus was preparing them for. And look how smart Jesus is. What did he do? That's exactly what he was doing. He knew this, and he was preparing them to do the things that he was doing. All these miracles and healings, because he already knew he would not be with them physically on this earthly plane for very much longer. He already had decided that his destiny, he was going to fulfill his destiny of going to the cross and dying. And he knew that that time was quickly approaching, and he was trying to grow them up and get them to the next level before he left. So he sent them out in the boat to see how they would handle the sea of life by themselves, especially if a storm came or when a storm came. And then when the storm was raging, he went to them, but not in another boat. He didn't teach them a different spiritual practice. He was always one step ahead of them. He was demonstrating to them now that there would come a time when a boat or any particular spiritual practice was not even necessary, where they could just walk on the sea of life without the support of any particular or specific belief system, just being at one with God, back to the timeless place of eternity where they had all come from, where the supernatural is ordinary. The hour is coming, and now is, where we won't worship on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, but the Father is seeking for true worshipers who will worship him in spirit and in truth, for God is spirit. That's where we got the name of our church from. Spirit and Truth Sanctuary is based on that scripture. So by walking on the water, Jesus was showing them that eventually there would not be any need for a boat, no container, no one religion or denomination, just spirit and truth. And just like he invited Peter, he invites every one of us, when he believes we are ready, to step out of the boat and to walk on the water just as he does, where the supernatural becomes natural to us. But just like Peter, sometimes we're going to look at the waves. We're going to get our focus off of that, off of him and the example he gave us, and we're going to start thinking that the waves are more powerful than we are. We're going to forget that Jesus told us that we too can contain the Christ spirit and the Christ consciousness. And when we do, we're probably going to do the exact same thing Peter did and call out, Lord, save me. And Jesus will come and save us again. He will let us have another salvation experience as many times as we need to, and remind us, just like he reminded Peter, that all we need is faith, and the winds in our lives will cease when we begin to understand that that's what he's saying. So sometimes it's one step forward, 2 steps back. But to be like Jesus, to not only be the captain of our own boat, but to know that eventually we won't even need a boat, is our goal. An eternity of supernatural oneness with God, our source, is where we are headed. And whether we're in a boat or walking on the water, that should always be our direction. So how do we get there? In my opinion, we've got to go back and revisit our relationship with the supernatural and bring a little more balance to the way we currently defined what we think of as real. One of the best descriptions I've come across for how we need to navigate the future of spirituality is in a book called Tomorrow's God. It's actually the follow-up, the sequel to the book Conversations with God. It was written by the same author, Neil Donald Walsh, and it's written in the same style or format that as Conversations with God was, which you may or may not know is like an actual conversation between God and the author. And so I'm just saying, be aware of that as I'm reading this next passage, that's the format, so you won't be confused. And we'll conclude with this today because I think it provides the perfect ending to our discussion of this topic. So the author begins the conversation by saying to God, "We need a new God." God says, "I know." "No, I'm serious. We need a new God. The old one isn't working anymore." The old one never worked. Some people think it did. They were not looking at the world around them. They weren't, not honestly, not comprehensively. They were seeing only what they wanted to see. They were not seeing the cruelty and the fighting and the killing that was going on in God's name. They were not seeing the separation and the oppression and the fear and the utter dysfunction. Or worse yet, they were seeing it and they played into it. They used it as a means of controlling people. In truth, the old God, yesterday's God, might have made individual lives work here and there, perhaps even many of them. But that God was never able to create a just society or a joyful, harmonious civilization, to say nothing of a peaceful world. And that God can't do it even today. Even today, with all your powers of instant communication, total connection. Okay, now I want you to listen to this in light of what we were talking about earlier. Even today, with all your powers of instant communication, total connection, increased awareness, sophisticated technology, and marvelous miracles, you can't produce the simple, humble experience for which humanity has yearned from the beginning of time. You can't produce peace, and you can't produce lasting joy. All right, so time out. I want to stop here and interject that this is what I was talking about when I was discussing the need for the supernatural. This world, the one we've created with the God we've created, the one he's talking about here as yesterday's God, this world of believing almost exclusively in science and technology has never been enough for us because it hasn't been able to produce for us what we want and need most, lasting peace and joy. We've developed all these weapons and defense systems, and we've built up our armies thinking that this will make us feel safe. And that if we feel safe, we'll have peace. But has it? Has any of this made us feel safe or brought us peace? We're all scared to death today that if one little wrong move is made, Putin's going to push that button. So the answer to that is no. What about COVID? 2 years ago, we kept saying if we can just get a vaccine, if our scientists and doctors and medical communities can just come up with a vaccine, then we'll be okay. So then we got a vaccine. And yet, people kept getting the virus. People kept giving the virus to each other, even those who were vaccinated. So now they're saying everybody needs a booster. Everybody got a booster. Now they're pushing for a second booster. So tell me, is science and technology making you feel safe right now? Is it bringing you peace? Is it producing joy? What about what's coming out of the White House? Government. Democracy is, presumably the best form of government in the world. But what's coming out, it doesn't matter which party or which person is sitting there. It's not bringing us any more peace. So, no, none of that is giving us what we need. We need something more. as he said here, we need a new God, all right? Or we need a new understanding of God, okay? God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It is we, us, who need to change or to change our concept of God. Okay, back to the book. He says, now this is the author again asking a question. Why? Why can't all these best efforts of humanity and all the help we've begged for and received from God produce this result? And this is God's answer. Because the God in whom you believe isn't real. The God in whom you believe is made up. It is a God you created out of thin air, having nothing to do with ultimate reality. The world as we know it is on the brink of disaster. All the esoteric wisdom of the past has helped it correct its course before, and it can do so again. But that wisdom must now be expanded to take into account humanity's expanded possibilities and capability for self-destruction. The more you know about how to destroy yourself, the more you need to know how to save yourself. Now, time out one more time. Notice again, he did not say here, the more you know how to destroy yourselves, the more you need to fall on your knees and get a hold of the horns of the altar and repent from your sin and turn away from your wicked ways so that some eternal external God will come down and save you. That is yesterday's concept of God. That's what we've been believing for a long time now and has not worked. Back to the book once more. What is required is nothing less than a new worldwide message from humanity to humanity itself. We're talking to ourselves now. We're not begging God for anything. We're talking to ourselves. It is time now to expand your base of knowledge of God and of life, to grow in your understanding, to increase your awareness, and to enlarge your consciousness. It's what we're all about here at Spirit and Truth. It is time to move from the old spirituality to the new spirituality, to let go of yesterday's God and embrace tomorrow's God. But let's be clear that what we are talking about here is not a new God, but a new experience of what God has always been, an entity without gender, size, shape, color, or any of the human characteristics you have given him. Tomorrow's God will change form as each moment and each individual seeking to experience God dictates. We learned about that in the shack, didn't we? God can change form according to how you need him, her, it to relate to you. Tomorrow's God will talk with everyone all the time, communicating with humanity in every moment. So in other words, there's no hierarchy. There's no people that are more spiritual and hear from God more than other people. God has always revealed himself to all human beings all the time, yet only a few humans have embraced these revelations and have seen them for what they are. God, the force, the energy, the design, the experience that some call divinity, shows itself in your life in the way that is exactly and perfectly suited to the time, place, and situation at hand. And you either call that experience God or you call it something else. Coincidence, synchronicity, or a random event, whatever. Yet what you call it does not change what it is. It merely indicates your belief system about it. If you believe that the way life is showing itself to you now is God, you will see it as God. So what do we always say? You're always creating your own reality, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. So the way life is showing itself to you, that's God. And if you believe that, then you'll see it as such. You'll see it as God. If you do not believe that the way life is showing itself to you now is God, you will not see it as God. You will remain in your victimhood, thinking other people and some external God are doing things to you or punishing you. Some say that seeing is believing, but I tell you that believing is seeing. And that, my friends, is the difference between putting your faith and trust only in what you can experience through your five senses, in what you have physical evidence for, in what science and technology and reason tell you is real, and in believing in something beyond this world, in things that are above or that transcend nature. That is supernatural. So if you want to step out of the boat and walk on the water, take a walk on the wild side with Jesus, okay, either physically or metaphorically, you have to believe first in a power or a force that is unseen. And that belief in itself is what will create a new world with a new spirituality and a new concept of God and of ourselves and our place in that world. Amen? Amen. That feels like it's not finished. We may continue with that next week, but that's a good introduction, though, to what I wanted to talk about, of taking a walk on the wild side that we now view as supernatural, because someday when we fully ascend into who we were always meant to be, supernatural things just seem ordinary and natural. Okay? All right, so join us tomorrow night at 6:30 for our continuing series, The Gift of Imperfection, and also on Sunday. We'll see you. Until then, be at peace. I love you. Have a great week.